My name is Ike Nahum with the New York, New Jersey Cuba Sea Coalition. On behalf of the remarkable coalition of Cuba Solidarity activists and organizations that united in an exemplary way to put together the now rescheduled for November 13th to 15th, March 21st and 22nd International Conference for the Normalization of U.S.-Cuba Relations, I want to welcome all of you to this webinar. The response to this, so far close to 400 people, is astonishing and inspiring under the current conditions, and we should all be very proud of our united movement. This virtual turnout only indicates how our efforts were on course to holding this weekend in New York City the most united and largest Cuba Solidarity effort around our beautiful cause of defending the Cuban Revolution and ending the criminality of the bipartisan U.S. economic and political war. We knew that hundreds of people were coming in for this conference. But this plenary, the panel tomorrow, and future virtual events we will discuss today, especially to focus on Cuba's amazing leadership in this world medical crisis. And in our upcoming Zoom meetings, it says loud and clear that we will adapt to the objective realities we face with struggling humanity, But we will fight to find the path forward. In fact, we are in the best position politically because we are in the trenches with our Cuban sisters and brothers, who we will hear from directly tonight from our sister Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez from the Cuban Mission to the United Nations. I don't have to tell anyone here the grave crisis facing humanity, especially oppressed humanity, from the criminal irresponsibility of our rulers and the social catastrophe faced by working people from a hollowed out world neoliberal capitalist order. But there is an emerging vanguard, light, pointing the way forward from the island of solidarity, from revolutionary and socialist Cuba. And it is nothing less than shameful how US and other big business media are suppressing facts and real news due to anti-Cuba prejudice. And we are going to combat that. We are going to make it politically untenable for that. We are going to tell the truth about, for example, the interferon alpha 2B drug produced and designed in Cuba, produced also in China and Germany, that has already been effectively used against the coronavirus. We are going to tell the truth about the heroic act of solidarity of Cuba in allowing the MS Bremen to dock and to repatriate the human beings on it. So we are going to organize to tell the truth. That is why we are here for this first webinar. We're going to organize to tell the truth by any means necessary. Viva Cuba. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ike Nahum. We're grateful for your opening words. My name is Gail Walker, and I work with IFCO Pastors for Peace. I'm honored to be here with you all today. As Ike mentioned, we're excited that we have so many participants from across the globe, indeed, that are joining us. I'm going to be your chair this evening, just really helping to kind of move us along, but grateful that you can be here. We'll be having an opportunity for questions and answers. For those of you who are joining us via computer or telephone, if you've got the Zoom application, there is a section that's labeled Q&A, and we want to encourage people to put in your questions as the presentations are being shared. And we will, at the end of the presentations, be able to try to address as many of those questions as possible. But please use that. Also, for those of you who are joining us via Facebook, there is a way to also make your questions known there. And again, we will do the best we can to present those to the presenters. If there are questions that are specifically geared toward a particular presenter, please try to make that known as well. And we'll do the best we can to make those, get those questions out to the presenters. And we are excited to have a very robust panel, plenary this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you are. We want to first introduce our first presenter, and that is Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez. She is the ambassador of the Cuban mission to the United Nations. Those of us in the New York area who have had the opportunity to either visit the United Nations or be at activities here in the city, she's no stranger to us. We're so proud to have her with us, not only today, but her voice has been one that has been, an important voice, important representative of Cuba. And we're grateful that she can be with us this evening. So I want to first ask the Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez to please take the floor.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you all of you that joined today in this webinar, and to continue the struggle despite of these difficult circumstances that we are living on. One of the issues that I would like to raise in my first presentation is dealing with the situation of COVID-19 in Cuba. And taking into account there was a lot of negative media against the Cuban government and how we are handling this situation. As any crisis, we take a step in different how the epidemiological situation is evolved. So there is different step, and the Cuban government is acting, taking into account the situation in Cuba, and also hearing what the expert in Cuba is recommended. We have to take into account that we have a very well-equipped health system with a strong primary health care program. We have committed scientific and a government with the political will to face this pandemic and not leave no one behind. So we have the first case of coronavirus in Cuba in the 11th of March. And until today, 20th of March, we have 21 cases that have been confirmed positive. Out of this, one died. And just today was informed to the population, because we are informing in a daily basis to our population how is the situation in the country, that 2 patients have been reported in a critical condition and 18 are clinically stable. 716 people have been hospitalized as for epidemiological surveillance, among which 389 are suspected cases. And also we have more than 28,000 people under active surveillance at the primary level, at the community level. So what measure we are taking? Because people are asking that the government have to close the border, that the government have to save people at home, are asking this to Cuba, where they never asked this to other countries that start closing the border, where they have more than 9,000 people with the virus. So in response to the international outbreak, we have increased our epidemiological surveillance throughout the country, and we have been structured a medical system to the different levels, at the primary level, secondary and tertiary level. And also all our healthcare units have the instruction to immediate medical assistance to those persons who appear to be suspect of that have the virus. All our healthcare personnel have been trained in not only the diagnosis of the disease, but also in the treatment of the disease. In our ports of entry, we keep, because this is not something new that we have with the virus, we have it before, we are maintaining our health personnel in all the ports and airports. But we are adding scanners in the place in order to measure the temperature of the passengers. And those passengers that are, we consider suspect to have the disease, well, there was a more closely monitoring at the local level. The border has not been closed, but yesterday the government decided to take the decision to regulate the entrance of the person to Cuba. So with effect on next Tuesday, the only residents, persons that are resident in Cuba can be entry into our country. This decision is not only the arrival by air, but the arrival by sea. So as I told you, the ports are not closed because we need to make some exemption. For example, for if we want to send our medical team abroad, we need our ports. If we want to receive charter with Cuban that have been in other countries that want to return to the country. So that's the reason why we need to keep the ports open. This is other measure that the government are taking is the training, the information to the population in the mass media, in the social media, and at the community level, in the schools, in the workplace, in order how to keep safe and how to prevent to be contracted. So this is in general terms the measure that we have been taking, put in place. Also the mass events have been canceled, the meetings have been canceled. But this is, as I told you, in general terms, the measure taken by the government, but also I would like to explain what we are doing, not only to keep safe the Cuban population, but also to help other peoples abroad. Here, we have medical cooperators in more than 58 countries. Among them, in those 58 countries, 34 of these countries have the COVID-19. So we already trained our personnel in those countries to detect and to treat this disease. We are preparing in the Institute of Tropical Diseases more than 400 cooperators in order to respond to the request of medical assistance. Just right now, we send 6 Cuban specialists to Venezuela. We send also a team to Nicaragua. We sent yesterday a team to Suriname and Grenada. And just today is arriving to Lombardy, Italy, a team of 53 Cuban doctors and nurses in order to respond to the request of the authority of this locality of Italy to help them to cope with the virus. We are doing everything, all of these things, despite the blockade imposed by the U.S. government to Cuba, that everybody knows that this year have been strengthened to levels never seen before. But for us, as it's very important that we are saying that this crisis, the only way to solve this crisis is through the cooperation or through the solidarity. We have to put political agendas aside. We have to put ideologies aside. And we have all countries in the world, we have to cooperate in order that we can solve the situation that we have in the world. I'm going to leave it here, and then I'm going to ask some questions or other questions that participants in the webinar would like to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rodriguez. That's astounding. It's difficult to moderate, take notes, absorb all of this. It's incredibly important information. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really excited. I want to remind people that we are recording this, that there will be materials available following this webinar. I want to just very quickly say, looking at the chat bar, I'm so excited to see that there are people from it truly is international. We have greetings from Italy, from South Africa, from Spain. So it's exciting that we have a lot of different people outside of those of us here in the United States and in Canada that are joining us. So next up, we have a very exciting video greeting from Dr. Jorge Delgado, who is a epidemiologist. He's the director of Cuba's Central Medical Collaboration Unit, leading epidemiologist and fighter for the health of not only the people of Cuba, but people of the world. He is going to bring greetings to us through video, but we are going to ask Martine Coppel to introduce the video. Martine is the editor of the book Red Zone. Many of us have had a chance to read this book that just came out, Red Zone, Cuba and the Battle Against Ebola in West Africa, by in collaboration with Enrique Ubieta, recently published by Pathfinder Press. In February, Martine spoke at a panel discussion in Havana, a number of panel discussions in Havana, presenting the book, one sponsored by ECAP, the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the Peoples, and the other at the Pedro Curie Institute for Tropical Medicine. And as part of his time there, made arrangements with the doctor and ECAP to prepare this video that we will be seeing today at this conference. And Martine is also active in the New York, New Jersey, Cuba Sea Coalition. Martine.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Yeah, well, it's first an honor to be speaking after the ambassador of Cuba, Ana Silvia Rodriguez. This video message that we will see was recorded by ECAP for us as a tool to fight for the demand that Washington end its economic war against Cuba, to tell the truth as broadly as possible about the Cuban Revolution and its example. It will be posted to the conference website so that it can be used along with a second video message from Enrique Ubieta, the author of Red Zone. As Gail mentioned, Dr. Jorge Delgado is the head of Cuba's medical cooperation programs abroad. In 2014, he led the Cuban Brigade in Sierra Leone during the Ebola epidemic. He previously served in Angola, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Paraguay. That tells you something. As Delgado points out, Cuba was decisive in ending the epidemic. It did what no other government even tried to do, least of all Washington, and that was to provide doctors and nurses to care for desperately ill human beings, health workers who treated patients and their families with dignity and respect, who went as volunteers. When the Cuban government put out the call, 12,000 medical workers volunteered in 3 days. Cuba's internationalism is a product of a socialist revolution, and so is its healthcare. Working people took state power and overturned capitalist rule, transforming society and themselves. It's not a medical question, it's which class holds power. And that's why the Cuban Revolution sets such a powerful example for working people here. And it's why the US rulers hate the Cuban Revolution, as we've been discussing, why they've tried and failed to destroy it for 60 years under both Democratic and Republican White Houses alike. And it's why, as Dr. Delgado explains, today Washington is slandering Cuba's doctors, its medical internationalists, claiming they're slaves, so-called victims of human trafficking, and why we must campaign to answer those lies with the facts. Those facts are even more striking today with the global coronavirus pandemic that we're all aware of. And Cuba's response, as always, as the ambassador said, is solidarity. The sending of voluntary medical brigades to countries around the Caribbean and other countries. the welcoming of a British cruise ship that was callously turned away by the US and other governments, and that they treated the sick. And of course, the revolution's response at home, not lockdowns, layoffs, and fear-mongering like here, but working people calmly, mobilizing through their mass organizations, and above all, the family doctors and clinics in each neighborhood that the ambassador was mentioning, where no one is left on their own. So with that, let's hear Dr. Delgado.
I just want to say very quickly that those of you on the phone may not be able to see the video, but you will be able to hear the audio. We hope.
You can see how many years with the first Cuban Medical Brigade in Algeria after the independence of this country was 57 Cuban doctors and nurses. From this time to now, more than 450,000 health workers from Cuba was working in more than 160 countries. All the continent received the support of the Cuban medical team. You can see this is the possibility for our small country and poor country and blockade country to assist another country that receive and need the medical attention. You can imagine in this time that more than 1 billion or 1,600 million of people receive the medical attention from the Cuban medical profession.
So we're starting the video again now with the audio.
Dear friend, in the International Summit in New York, in occasion to support the Cuban medical, the Cuban solidarity with our country. I am Dr. Delgado Bustillo, Chief of the Cuban Medical Collaboration from the Ministry of Health of Cuba. The history of the Cuban Medical Collaboration started in 1963. You can see how many years with the first Cuban Medical Brigade in Algeria after the independence of this country was 57 Cuban doctors and nurses. From this time to now, more than 450,000 health workers from Cuba was working in more than 160 countries. All the continent received the support of the Cuban medical team. You can see this is the possibility for our small country and poor country and blockade country to assist another country that receive and need the medical attention. You can imagine in this time that more than 1 billion or 1,600 million of people receive the medical attention from the Cuban medical professional. More than 6 million of people save their life with our doctor, nurse, and technician. This is solidarity. This is the support of our country to another people, poor people, in the places that another doctor and professional health cannot or doesn't like visit this place to bring medical attention. But in the last 2 years, with the government of the new government of the United States, they start to attack our medical collaboration. Say that the Cuban doctor, nurses, our professionals are slaves, and we are the people to traffic with the human being. You can imagine the Cuban government, our people are slaves and working overseas. This is false, of course. In the last very critical situation with the Ebola disease that affects different countries in Africa, Liberia, Equatorial Guinea-Conakry, and Sierra Leone, the government, the World Health Organization requests the attention to assist the people that are dying, a lot of them. And then the Ban Ki-moon, member, chief of the United Nations, request to the government of Cuba the human resource to work to save the life of the people. And in the same time, the WHO organization, Dr. Margaret Chan, requests to our Ministry of Health, doctor and nurse, to combat this illness. Why to Cuba? Why another country? Oh, they request to United States money, request French money, request England money to support this big outbreak. But request to Cuba, the poor country, the human resource. Why? Because they know this is the only country overseas who can assist for nothing, only for solidarity, to try to save the life of another people. This is the reason that the government, the United States, now, there are other people in the American organization, Almagro, attack our government, our people, our doctor to say they are slaves and human traffic with a human being. This is false, I repeat again. And this is only the reason that the government want to destroy our prestige, want to destroy our solidarity, imagine of our country. Really, you will know how was in some time the Cuban medical collaboration. For example, in 2005, when the Katrina attack New Orleans, our president this time, our leader, Fidel Castro, prepared a big contingent of doctors and nurses to assist the people from New Orleans. The government of the United States said, no, we don't like that. But this resource was working immediately in the hard work in Pakistan. You can imagine in 3 months, Cuba deployed in Pakistan 2,500 young workers with 32 hospitals, campaign hospital with all the resources. Only Cuba can do that for free. Don't request money for nothing, for any country, for anybody. And in the Ebola time was another important mission for the doctors from Cuba. And really, our government, our doctors, nurses, technicians, health, are ready in all the time to assist another country, the poor country. You can be sure about that. The world now can have the possibility of the solidarity of the government of Cuba. Thank you very much.
Well, I just want to extend our gratitude to not only Dr. Delgado and his team, but to Martin and others who helped to bring this video to us. It's very inspiring, very important, particularly at this time. I'm really excited and proud to be a part of this webinar that we try to get this information out despite our inability to meet face-to-face. In that regard, I think that it would be really important for those of you to know that at this point we have 255 participants on this plenary right now. And only those of us attending can see that number, but it's important that we share that information. And I think that's a number that's growing. It's also certainly, I think, the largest webinar as far as attendees that the organizers of doing this kind of thing, the FOCUT Alliance for Global Justice, have ever seen. and we've got at least 20 people joining us on Facebook. So we are reaching many corners of the world, and that's really important. Next up, we have, we're going to hear from our brother Andres Gomez. Andres, many of you know, is the national coordinator of the Antonio Maceo Brigade. For the last 42 years, the brigade has been working in the Cuban community in the United States, defending the Cuban people's rights to self-determination and its right to live and develop in peace. At the same time, the brigade also works for the rights of the Cuban community in the United States to be able to relate to their families in Cuba. We know that that is a big obstacle that has been put out in the way as a result of US policy. So the right of them to relate to their families in Cuba as well as the rest of Cuban society without any restrictions. And for the last 19 years, the Antonio Maceo Brigade has been part of the coalition Alianza Martiana for the same purposes. That coalition consists of 6 organizations whose members are Cuban and Latin Americans living in Miami. And we welcome our brother, Andres Gomez, a longtime friend and vocal advocate in defense of Cuba, to join us now. Andres, please make yourself seen, my friend. You can make your video, press your video button to so that we can see you. So Andres, whether it's on the bottom of your screen or the side, I don't know how it's set up on your computer. There's the, if you move the cursor around, you should see the stop video. If you press that, your face should come up, as well as the audio. Okay. So we're going to, I know Andres is there. It may just be, you know, his technical abilities. Ah, there we are. Okay, and then Andres, is your audio? Okay, now click your microphone. There we go.
Okay,
Excellent.
a little bit of time, but we did it.
No worries, we got you.
All right. Buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon to all participating in this internet event that shows us the way through which we must not cease working in any constructive way towards the goals of denouncing and demanding the end of the US, in this case, the Trump administration, policies of aggression against the people of Cuba and the people of Venezuela, policies that have the same intentions. A recognition to the work that has been accomplished by the organizers of this second international conference, especially Ike, Gail, Cheryl, and others in the US and Canada. First of all, our tribute to the hero and heroic life of Rafael Cancel Miranda, hero of the people of Puerto Rico's struggle to attain not only its independence, but its rights and freedoms in order to build a more just society, among them its dignity. Rafael was a participant and a guest of honor 2 years ago in our first conference. Our recognition as well to Maria de los Angeles, his longtime companion, who made possible for him to be able to relate and speak and write to others throughout the world. We are not confronted by a most dangerous health and economic catastrophe affecting the daily life and livelihood of the peoples of the world and of this country as well. In Cuba, measures have been taken to ensure the well-being of the Cuban people. We support those measures, including the one affecting the entrance to Cuba of all persons with the exceptions of Cuban citizens with residence in the country. I represent today all the organizations that in Miami make up La Coalición Alianza Martiana. Our coalition is composed of the following 6 organizations: the Antonio Maceo Brigade, the Alianza Martiana as an individual organization, la Asociación Cultural José Martí, el Círculo Bolivariano de Miami, la Asociación de Mujeres y Radio Miami. We have worked in pursuits of our common goals with other fraternal organizations, principally among them the Foundation for the Normalizations of U.S.-Cuban Relations, the Socialist Workers' Party, and the U.S. Hands-Off Venezuela of South Florida. The Trump administration's criminal strengthening of the policies of blockade and others, among them the denial of visas, travel and immigrant visas to Cuban citizens in Cuba, the closing of the U.S. consulates that, according to U.S. present regulations and by immigration accords between the United States and Cuba, have the right to obtain such visas. The measures restricting U.S. citizens without relatives in Cuba, their constitutional rights to travel to Cuba, and the constant threats to deny Cubans and Cuban Americans living in the United States to travel to Cuba. We have been very active in those pursuits. Recently, we have had a big caravan and our meeting hall has been attacked by Cuban right-wingers. At this time of place, we cannot forget that since the early 60s, the governments of the United States have engaged in the introduction of Cuba of plagues that have affected human lives, livestock lives, and agricultural harvests necessary to feed our population, costing the people of Cuba many lives, including children's. This is known by the classified US intelligence documents and Cuban intelligence sources. We cannot discard that there are many in government circles today to cause havoc in Cuba that favor to cause havoc in Cuba would favor the introduction in Cuba of the coronavirus in spite of consequences that it might have for the people of the United States. 620,000 Cubans living abroad have traveled to Cuba in 2019. Almost 500,000 of us from the US, and from South Florida, about 85% of those living in the United States. And the reason for so much travel is the need to relate to our families in the island, our friends in the island, who are families as well, and the Cuban society in general. That is how much support there is in our Cuban community to be able to travel to Cuba without any restrictions. That is why there has been so much support in our community for candidates who support the normalization of relations between the United States and Cuba. Contrary to what you must have heard, hear or read in the press or by Mr. Trump and his allies in the Cuban right-wing organizations, during the last 3 presidential elections, starting with the US Obama campaign in 2008, it is estimated by trusted poll authorities that 50% of the Cuban and Cuban Americans electorate in Florida have voted for the presidential candidate that publicly favors the normalizations of relations with Cuba. Presently in Miami-Dade County, there are 800,000 Hispanic registered voters, and out of a total of 1.5 million registered voters. Of these, it is estimated that 60% of those are Cubans and Cuban Americans. Donald Trump lost in the 2016 elections, Miami-Dade County, by 291,000 votes, of a total of 957,000 votes. He received 333,000 votes, and he lost by 291,000 votes. Senator Marco Rubio, who was up for re-election in 2016, lost Miami-Dade County by 109,000 votes. This year, we have to assume that the election in Florida will be as close as it has been during the last 3 elections. It is therefore possible for us to help make the election to be delivered to those that favor the normalization of relations with Cuba. Florida has 29 electoral votes, 3rd largest in the country. Today, friends and comrades, we have to do with what we have and to do it well. We have to take to the web and inform our friends and clarify for them the situation. There are $20 million appropriated by Congress by the request of the administration to pay those who in the internet become mercenaries to confuse and lie about the truth of Cuba. Let us do our work and do it well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andres. Important and again, inspiring words. I'm feeling honored to be here with all of you today. I want to remind everyone that we want to do the best we can to field your questions, but we need you to use the Q&A box or the Q&A link or button on the Zoom app. So that's on my screen, it's along the bottom, it may be along the side or the top, but it's literally says Q&A, and that's the where you should be putting your questions. I see a lot of questions showing up in the chat box, but in order to make this work and not have people have to navigate between different areas, we ask you to use the Q&A area to put your questions there. Next up, we're going to hear from our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico. We had intended to hear from our sister Milagros in Puerto Rico due to just, challenges with the not only technology, but also I think dare to say, just the what it means to live under occupation in Puerto Rico. The fact that there's really been limited access to for our sisters and brothers there. As a matter of fact, the 2 people that we do have on the line, we struggle to get them here to join us. But we're grateful that Jocelyn Velasquez and Rogelio Maldonado III, both coordinators of La Jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas from Puerto Rico, are with us. This is really, friends, these are members of the new resistance leaders in Puerto Rico. So it's really important that we hear from our family there. And Jocelyn and Rogelio, are you with us?
Sí, estamos aquí.
Bueno, okay. So if you will go ahead and make yourself seen, I will move myself out once your video shows.
You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
The host has stopped. Okay. Is that, can we get any guidance from you, Cheryl or Elaine? Okay.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you. Okay. Welcome.
Hola, gracias y saludos a todas y a todos. Pues nada, para dar un pequeño resumen de lo que está pasando en Puerto Rico, como saben, nosotros somos una colonia de los Estados Unidos, lo que implica que nuestra situación política dificulta aún más la respuesta ante la crisis. Apenas la semana pasada, el domingo de la semana pasada, el gobierno decretó un toque de queda. Se suspendieron los trabajos, las escuelas y todo el trabajo en la isla, a excepción de lo que ellos llaman las necesidades de seguridad nacional o de seguridad máxima. que son los únicos que pueden laborar, que son hospitales, supermercados y servicios de primera necesidad. Pero al mismo tiempo las fronteras no han sido cerradas, los aeropuertos siguen abiertos, la gente sigue llegando al país porque hasta que el gobierno de los Estados Unidos no dé la orden, no se permite que en Puerto Rico se detenga el tráfico aéreo. Lo que implica que constantemente están llegando turistas, están llegando personas por diferentes motivos. Hasta hace algunos días había muchas críticas a la forma en la que se estaban recibiendo a esos turistas, pues no se les estaba haciendo ningún chequeo y se les dejaba entrar libremente. A la fecha han habido más de 100 arrestos por personas que el gobierno alega han violentado el toque de queda, mientras que los turistas, como dije antes, siguen paseándose por las playas, los parques y por las áreas comunes de la isla sin que haya ninguna clase de restricción para ellos. Otro de los grandes problemas que estamos enfrentando es la falta de pruebas. Tienen a la población encerrada en sus casas, se nos prohíbe salir de nuestras casas, pero no se están administrando pruebas. A la fecha, solamente se han administrado 52 pruebas en todo el país. De esas 52 pruebas, solamente ellos alegan que hay 3 casos positivos, pero, por ejemplo, en el hospital de veteranos, en donde sí tienen acceso a mayor cantidad de pruebas, ellos han diagnosticado ya a 11 personas, versus el Departamento de Salud del Estado Libre Asociado, que solo ha diagnosticado 10 para un total de 21 personas ya diagnosticadas oficialmente con el virus. La preocupación más importante que estamos teniendo es que primero se está repitiendo lo que pasó durante el huracán María, y es que el gobierno está escondiendo la suma real de las personas infectadas, que están negando los servicios de salud a las personas, las están mandando para su casa porque no tienen la infraestructura para atender a la gente, no tienen los hospitales, ni las camas, ni los espacios de aislamiento necesarios, y a falta de esa infraestructura lo que han hecho es encerrar a la población en las casas y dejar que las cosas fluyan como ha pasado. Esto se empeora porque, como dije antes, después del huracán María, mucha gente se quedó sin hogar, así que hay hacinamiento, hogares de familia, etcétera, sin contar la crisis que se vive en el sur de la isla, en donde decenas de familias todavía viven en campamentos al aire libre después de haber perdido sus residencias por el terremoto de enero. Así que tenemos un escenario bastante complicado. De parte del Estado no hay ninguna respuesta, no se ha paralizado, por ejemplo, el pago de renta, ni se le ha dado ninguna garantía a las personas que trabajan por cuenta propia de que van a recibir algún salario o algún apoyo del Estado. Por el contrario, esta semana los legisladores, se les presentó una legislación para que se le diera algún nivel de apoyo a este sector, que es uno de los más grandes del país, y ellos se negaron, dijeron que ellos no iban a intervenir en eso, que eso era parte de la banca privada, del sector privado de comercio, y que ellos no iban a intervenir ni iban a imponer ninguna clase de apoyo ni de ayuda a las personas que trabajan por cuenta propia o que no son empleados regulares de gobierno o otras instituciones. ¿Qué más les puedo decir? Se está especulando, o mejor dicho, el gobierno está tanteando el terreno para ver si establece una ley marcial. Es lo que se está hablando con más fuerza en el país, porque quieren cerrar los supermercados y cerrar los pocos lugares que aún están prestando algún nivel de servicio. Así que en ese panorama, pues nuevamente la crisis en Puerto Rico la vivimos un poco más intensa, dada nuestra situación colonial. Y peor aún, tenemos hermanos y hermanas como nuestros hermanos cubanos que están haciendo un trabajo extraordinario y que aquí mismo lo han podido plantear alrededor del mundo. Y a nosotros, ¿verdad? Por nuestra relación con Estados Unidos se nos impide acercarnos a nuestros hermanos cubanos para no únicamente recibir apoyo, sino orientación sobre cómo lidiar con la crisis. Así que es uno de los momentos probablemente más difíciles de nuestra historia. Hay pocas posibilidades de que podamos sobrellevar esto de una manera positiva, pero vamos a seguir haciendo las denuncias y colaborando en lo que se pueda, ¿verdad? Para que el país pueda sobrevivir a pesar de todo esto. Gracias y buenas tardes.
Gracias. Thank you, Jocelyn. And Rogelio, are you able to summarize and give us a translation?
Yeah, I will try.
Thank you.
I'm gonna make a fast summary. She said, here in Puerto Rico, you know, we are a colony of the United States, and in our case, the health problem that we have now is getting worse because we have a government, a hypothetical government, that can't handle this situation because they are not making the tests for this problem. No, they are like they do since Hurricane Maria. They are hiding the cases of the infected. Also, they are talking to put martial law. Right now, we are on curfew. We can't take out from our houses, but for the other side, they are not closing the airports, and all the tourists are arriving to the island are walking in the streets. But for us that live in Puerto Rico, we cannot walk in the streets, and because we are a colony, we can't close by ourselves the ports, the airports, and that's the problem because the la enfermedad continue spreading for all the streets of the island, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rogelio, and also Jocelyn. You know, this is really important. We're hearing so much about Cuba, and it's clearly important that we be informed, but I think it's also very critical that we be informed about what's happening right here in our backyard with our sisters and brothers in Puerto Rico. We're grateful for the work that you're doing and will continue to do. And we know that your plan had been to be here with us during this conference, where our hope is that we can find a way to have you be with us once we get past this worst case scenario with this virus. And we're grateful to that Milagros Rivera had made every effort. Milagros is the leader of the Comité de Solidaridad con Cuba in Puerto Rico, and she was not able to join us, but we're so grateful that that both you, Milagros and Jocelyn, Jocelyn and Rogelio were able to be with us. And please stay tuned. We do want to make sure that there's an opportunity for you to participate in the Q&A section. Questions are coming in. They're coming into the chat box. I want to also remind people to please make use of the Q&A button on the web Zoom or the Facebook page. We're still at 255 people that have joined us via Zoom, and 27, Allison Bodine reported, are joining by Facebook. So this is great that we're getting information out. Okay, next we are going to be hearing from Sean O'Donoghue, who is on the line. He's a native of Montreal, Quebec. He's currently retired, but has worked in printing, served as a technician, and finally as an engineer. Our brother O'Donoghue, brother Sean, was a young internationalist militant during the El Salvador Revolution in the early 1980s for the FMLN, and in Nicaragua for the Sandinistas. And it was during that time that he developed a great admiration for Cuba. In 1994, he joined the Caravan, forgive my pronunciation, Sean, Caravan de Amité, Quebec, Cuba, which had come into existence a few months before, at the end of 1993, to support the Pastors for Peace and Friendshipment caravans to Cuba, and has stayed with the committee and movement ever since. And I am going to ask you, Sean, I apologize, to just give your title rather than me shift papers around. Please
Sure.
give your title and the name of the organization directly.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead,
Hello,
Sean.
everybody. First of all, introduce myself as the secretary of the Table de Concertation de Solidarité Québec-Cuba. This is an organization, well, and very proud to be here and very enthusiastic about what is being built. And I would like to give my greetings to the Ambassador, Sylvia Rodriguez, and First Secretary, Garel Fernandez, as far as Gail, the chairperson, and all the great organizers. I've been assisting in a few meetings, and I really see the work that's been going on, and that's great, and this will help a lot. I'm going to speak a little bit in French. I won't translate everything I do, but Quebec is a small nation in North America, about 8 million people, and French is our official language. French is the most important part of our culture that makes us who we are. I'm half Irish, but I do appreciate, I'm part French also, and French is the cement that puts us together. Alors, je vais dire quelques mots en français. Je ne traduirai pas tout. Je vais informer nos camarades américains et canadiens de ce qu'on fait. J'ai dit que je vois ça comme une grande opportunité pour faire un travail pour mettre fin au blocus, aider à mettre fin au blocus, comme nous l'avons fait pour les 5. Pour les 5, le travail qu'on a fait, c'était avec plusieurs organisations, et je pense que c'est ça qu'on est en train de voir naître ici. Alors, bravo pour les Québécois qui sont là, puis la conférence va reprendre en novembre, si le virus le permet. Ça devrait avoir lieu à New York, mais là on le fait par Internet, et on prend un pas en avant au niveau technique. Alors voilà, à la fin, si vous voulez poser des questions, il y a des boutons pour poser des questions, vous pouvez poser des questions. Back in English. Well, as a table de concertation, the Solidarity Quebec-Cuba has existed since 2002 in Quebec. We unite the different committees that throughout Quebec, and before 2002, there were other networks, but I won't get into that. And the oldest committee we have comes from since 1979. And since then, there's been new committees, and we're right now, there's, I would say, close to 20 committees throughout Quebec. We don't. And so our goals are to unite the different organizations as much as possible, to promote the friendship between peoples, and also to distribute factual information about Cuba. This means we counter disinformation that come up in the media or write letters. We do public campaigns against the blockade, and we also try to represent Quebec in events such as this one. One of the things we're doing now, is, along with Canadian cities, Vancouver and Ottawa, is we do picketing once a month, every 17th of the month. We sometimes go and we go in the subway stations, we go in front of the consulate, outside universities, and we present a petition against the blockade, which is a great tool because it allows us to go up to people and talk to them. And it's amazing the support we get. Everybody seems to like Cuba, but people don't know. A lot of people think the blockade is finished because of Obama. It went in the papers that things were being approved, so we have to tell them, no, the blockade is even worse, and it never really did finish. So I think that's one of the things we have to do is inform the public to bring up support. So we are very enthusiastic for this new coalition, and I think we could together help lift the blockade as we did for the Cuban 5. We had a very great campaign. We had the people, and to do so, as we did with the Cuban 5, I think we can inform people about the blockade, the general public, and get people to engage themselves. We can engage politicians at all levels, which is, I know this is going on, but together we haven't, on the blockade aspect, we haven't really started that work yet, but it's something that should be done. We also engage VIPs and well-known personalities, artists, lawyers, and so on, and use the media, and especially get the international movement going in a unified way. And I think that's the way we can convince our politicians, especially those of the United States, to lift the blockade. Because I know from what I read that probably there are very many who would want to lift the blockade. And if they have the public pushing them and supporting them, I'm sure we could do it. So that ends my presentation, and with greetings to everybody. And this is great work. Thanks again to all the organizers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sean. And we're grateful to have the participation of our family in Quebec, Table de Concertation de Solidarité. We're grateful that you could be with us. Next, we have another friend from up north, Dr. Isaac Saini, who is the director of the Transition Year Program at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada. The groundbreaking program established in 1970 to redress the educational barriers and injustices that confront Indigenous peoples in Canada and Black Nova Scotians. His teaching and scholarship encompasses Africa, the Caribbean, and the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, as well as Cuba and Black Nova Scotian history. He holds a PhD in history from the School of Oriental and African Studies, the University of London, a premier world center for the study of Africa, Asia, and study of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And he is also holds a JD from the Dalhousie Shuluk School of Law, and the author of numerous books, including Cuba, A Revolution in Motion. He's a longtime community activist and a participant in the anti-war movement and anti-racist struggle. And we welcome Dr. Isaac Saini, who is also the co-chair of and national spokesperson for the Canadian Network on Cuba. Isaac, are you with us? Thank you.
First, I'd like to say it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be on this plenary. I send my greetings, heartfelt greetings, warmest greetings from the Canada-Cuba Solidarity Movement to the Cuban ambassador and to our Puerto Rican sister. We support Puerto Rico and, of course, Cuba in the struggle for self-determination and against colonialism. Also, I would like to say as well that for the Canadian Network on Cuba and for the Canada-Cuba Solidarity Movement, defending Cuba is not just simply an abstract principle, but given what's unfolded in the world today, what's happening with the COVID-19 crisis, we see that Cuba points a way forward. It shows that it is possible to build societies both nationally and internationally based on social solidarity, genuine friendship, genuine justice, that it offers a model for the way human relations can be between people within societies and relations between various countries. As Gail pointed out, I am the co-chair and one of the co-chairs and the national spokesperson for the Canadian Network on Cuba. The Canadian Network on Cuba is the umbrella organization bringing together groups from Halifax in Eastern Canada to Vancouver in Western Canada, over 20 organizations that are involved in Canada-Cuba friendship and solidarity. And if you count the membership of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, which is a member of our organization, there's over 50,000 members of the Canadian Network on Cuba. We're primarily united by the desire to ensure that Canadian relations with Cuba remain based on respect for Cuba's sovereignty and Cuba's right of self-determination, which is why we've been extremely concerned about recent developments in Canada-Cuba relations. Canada-Cuba relations stretch back to the 18th century, where there were a significant amount of trading relationships between Cuba and particularly what is now Eastern Canada. But uninterrupted diplomatic relations have existed since 1945. So we're actually into the year that represents the 75th anniversary. It was just recently on March 16th, 75th anniversary of uninterrupted Canada-Cuba relations. When the Cuban Revolution triumphed, Canada, along with Mexico, was one of the only two countries in the Americas not to rupture its relationships with Canada. And the Canada-Cuba Solidarity Movement is almost as long as the Cuban Revolution itself. So very early on in the 1960s, we had a variety of groups that advocated friendship and solidarity with Cuba and tried its best to ensure that Canada's foreign policy did not end up following or mirroring that of the United States. And so one of the things that has recently happened, obviously now, is that Canada seems to be, particularly under this recent the Trudeau government, which was elected in 2015 and driven by then Canada's Foreign Minister, Christian Freeland, who is now Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, a very aggressive policy, not only to Venezuela, but also it seems to Cuba. One of the things that has happened recently is that obviously we've had the closing of the visa office in the Canadian Embassy in Havana. This has introduced all sorts of problems for exchanges between Cuba, scientific exchanges, cultural exchanges, sport exchanges, and so forth, as well as the links between Canadians and Cubans, people-to-people contacts, as people often like to call them. We have written to the Cuban Prime Minister, we have written to the Foreign Minister, we have written to the Minister of Immigration, and basically we have not received satisfactory replies. We've also seen the enforcing within Canada, and this is before the activation of Title III of Helms-Burton under Trump. We've seen even before that the implementation of Helms-Burton in Canada itself. For example, Honda Canada was fined received a considerable fine for renting cars to the Cuban embassy in Ottawa. In Canada, there's something called the Federal Extraterritoriality Measures Act, FEMA, that was passed in the 80s, specifically to deal with the extraterritorial nature of the Cuban economic war against Cuba. And this has never been enforced in Canada. Repeatedly, we have requested of the Canadian government that they should follow their own law, that Canadian law in Canada should trump the implementation or the enforcement of US law, particularly a law that is flagrantly against international law and is part of this criminal economic blockade against Cuba. So this is a very big concern for Canadians. Recently, we had, for example, Western Union will no longer send funds to Cuba from Canada. This is going to have very significant impacts on the various profound personal links that Canadians have with Cubans. It is important to bear in mind that every year more than 1 million Canadians visit Cuba. Canada is the largest source of tourists to Cuba, and about 60%, according to stats, 60% of these tourists are repeat tourists. So I think this is one thing that's important to bear in mind as well, right? Another thing as well that's linked specifically to some of these measures is that Canada is also the single largest foreign investor in Cuba. Sherritt International, for example, is the biggest, which is a Canadian company, is the largest, shall we say, investor in Cuba. So there's a whole manifold, number of challenges that are emerging. And we, for example, under the umbrella of the Canadian Network in Cuba, organized a symposium for Canadian parliamentarians, where we brought parliamentarians, but also major players in the Canadian business sector who invested in Cuba together to talk about the impact of the US blockade on Cuba. And of course, specifically when Trump activated Title III. So these are some of the major things that we're dealing with. We've also pointed out to Canada that given this recent medical crisis, that Canada can draw on Cuba's expertise. So we pointed out to them, and a letter has gone off from the Canadian, the Canada Cuba Friendship Association of Toronto, requesting, for example, that Canada also look at importing and using interferon alpha B, which is this drug that Cuba was developed in Cuba, also together with in China and Germany. That's also played a very important role in terms of boosting people's immune system in combating COVID-19. We haven't heard back from them, but given what's unfolding internationally and also what's unfolding in Canada, it's something for them to obviously seriously consider if they do seriously take the health of Canadians seriously. So we've also had, for example, Canadian First Nations community, Indigenous peoples here, nations, that are also requesting to use Cuban doctors because they suffer significant disparities, significant impoverishment, significant lack to social and health infrastructure, and this has become a very significant issue as well. So one of the things we're clearly looking at here is ensuring that Canada-Cuba relations do not descend further into what we think will be a mirroring of US-Cuba relations, And we also know there are very significant problems that Canada faces, because Canadians have a very strong affinity to Cuba. Having traveled to Cuba in their millions, Canadians have come away with a profound sense of respect, a profound sense of empathy, a profound sense of affinity, and a profound understanding of what Cuba has done in resisting US imperialism for over 60 years. So I think this is critically important, because for one thing, the Canadian government realizes that with this reservoir of tremendous support for Cuba that exists among Canadians, this tremendous respect, that quite often they have to tread carefully. But Christian Freeland and the Trudeau government seems determined in order to follow the US imperialist lead in terms of attacking sovereignty and self-determination, and the attempt of Latin American countries, particularly Venezuela and of course Cuba, in plotting their own destinies and trying to create better societies. So these are one of the fundamental things that we're struggling for. When it came to the closing of the visa operations, I think they made a misstep. Hundreds of letters, thousands of messages went to them condemning this measure because of its impact on Canada-Cuba relations, particularly on individual relations between Cubans who have family connections now in Cuba, but also in terms of people wondering if Canada was now following the US imperialist plan openly and overtly. So these are some of the things that we're involved in. We're going to fight. We're going to fight to end the US economic blockade. We're going to fight to make sure Canadian relations remain based on respect for mutual Cuba's sovereignty and for Cuba's self-determination, relations based on mutual respect and equality. But we're also going to fight to demonstrate that Cuba represents, as I said at the beginning, an example that it is better to build a better world, that it is possible, not just simply in a radical imagination that exists in our heads, but it's possible to see a concrete example of a world based on of a country based on justice, of social relations based on true social love, on social relations based on creating a society fit for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Isaac, for that impassioned presentation. I think it's, again, important for all of us to know that, you know, while we know that we are in the belly of the beast where this policy, this draconian policy resides, that we have the friendship and the support and the partnership of people across the globe, and particularly our friends in both Canada and Quebec. So thank you very much, Isaac, for that. I just wanted to say a few things before we bring on our at least our final speaker, before we open this up for questions. And that is to make sure that people are aware that this is happening today, but that tomorrow we will have a presentation, a webinar that will be taking place tomorrow. The title is "The Impact of the Blockade of Cuba on the People of the U.S. and What We Can Do About It." We've got Dr. Howard Ehrman from Chicago Cuba Coalition, who will be moderating. We expect to have a graduate of ELAM, the Latin America School of Medicine, where Cuba has provided a great opportunity for young people from various countries, including the US, including the very country that is blockading it, an opportunity to also present, and others that will be there. Brenda Lopez from the US Hands Off Cuba will be talking about the environment. And we have folk from the Hartford, Connecticut Coalition on Cuba talking about climate change, talking about the police, criminal, and restorative justice in Cuba, as well as Malcolm Sachs, who is a wonderful friend and a co-coordinator of the National VB, Vince Ramos Brigade, that will be talking about the educational systems and the struggles in New York and in the US, and lifting up what Cuba is doing, the example there. And also Aisling Pooley, who co-founder of Black Lives Matters in Chicago, will be talking about coronavirus and the efforts to bring it down. So please join us tomorrow. We'll be sending out information, same bat channel, same bat time, 2 p.m. Eastern, wherever time it was it started, where you are, it'll begin tomorrow. So please be sure to be with us. Other quick reference I wanted to make is that we have been talking about an action plan. The whole idea of this conference was to bring people together, not just to talk, but to take some form of action. So we are going to be sending out information that will continue to be something that we can disseminate to the participants. So please keep an eye out for information about that. We want to share information about travel. We know that things are changing rapidly. Respect the organization that has really been involved in organizing respectful and ethical travel to Cuba. We have information we want to share about the status of that organization and the work that they're doing. So there's a lot of materials that will be forthcoming. So please keep your ears and eyes peeled for that. And next, I want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Rosemary Mealy. Dr. Mealy, in addition to being a member of the board of directors of IFCO Pastors for Peace and a member of the New York, New Jersey Cuba Sea Coalition, is an international human rights activist. She is a recipient of several outstanding reporting awards from the National Association of Black Journalists. She's a former NGO representative of the National Alliance of Third World Journalists, a longtime friend of Cuba. She has worked as an internationalist journalist for Radio Havana, Cuba, and in 2011 was petitioned by the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the Peoples, ECAP, where she was awarded the Friendship Medal by the Council of State of the Republic of Cuba. And we are grateful to have her here to talk about the important work that's going on the legislative front. So please welcome Dr. Rosemary Mealy.
Well, thank you so much, Gail. And I want to say greetings to everyone, to our friends all over the world. Special thanks to the International U.S.-Cuba Normalization Planning Committee, to IFCO, the New York Cuba Sea, the National Network on Cuba, and so many others who over the months worked tirelessly to organize the conference, and now this webinar, especially to Cheryl, thank you. The legislative panel, which you would have been participating in at this time had we been face-to-face, was actually organized to provide concrete information and selective materials to the conference goers so that they could utilize that information and incorporate that information on many levels into our organizing efforts around the country. And these materials would be able to be used and could target local, state, and national elected leaders and policymakers. So we stand on the operative premise and support of those measures calling for what's known as incremental demands for an end to the inhumane US blockade against Cuba. However, the solidarity movement and the supporters, we must be united in our collective voice that must resonate the loudest by demanding a total repeal of the Helms-Burton Act. While there are certain aspects of various legislative measures that have been put forth, there are two specific bills that we would be encouraging people to support. And one would be Senator Leahy of Vermont's bill that was actually calling a bill that calls allowing United States citizens and legal residents to travel to Cuba. And then, of course, there is the Congressman Bobby Rush's H.R. 2404, which was a bill that was introduced in the House the House of Representatives last April. And that bill is titled United States-Cuba Relations Normalization Act. And you know, when we talk today, what it's really about, as Isaac mentioned, there's this piece there's a law that's called the Helms-Burton Act of 1996. And therefore, in our discussions and in our education, it's very important that we understand the provisions of that act, because the ending of the United States blockade against Cuba requires the passage of a federal bill. And that bill has to be signed by the President of the United States of America. So what happens, and when we read, and we were going to share this with Congressman Bobby Rush's H.R. 2404, at least the language of that bill is introduced with the following, and I quote, "The bill repeals the trade embargo on Cuba and other provisions restricting trade and travel to Cuba. The bill also removes restrictions on certain transactions related to trademarks used in connection with a confiscated business or asset. And two, that bill extends non-discriminatory trade treatment to Cuba, to Cuban products. And third, it prohibits and rescinds limits on remittances to Cuba." So as of February 21st, 2020, the bill has 13 co-sponsors. So for the purpose of this brief intervention, our panel, thanks to the archival organizing work of Peter Miller of the July 26th Coalition and the Boston Cuba Solidarity Coalition, assembled what we in New York like to call the End of the Blockade Legislative Toolkit. The End of the Blockade Legislative Toolkit. And that toolkit, we have links with two links, where included in the kit are local resolutions from around the country and resources to help with any campaigns that organizations wish to implement. In addition to that, it's a treasury toll. These links are a treasury, the information found in these links are a treasury toll of action-oriented design materials, all of which allows us not to have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, all over again. So the materials are comprised of sample documents, such as resolutions and letters to elected officials, both on the local and national level, where the organizing campaigns have successfully petitioned governing bodies to pass resolutions. And when we talk about resolutions, these resolutions passed in city councils and local initiatives, albeit symbolic, but they have the power to educate people. They have the power to educate the folks who are in a position to make decisions. And for whatever we might think about political work or working within the confines of politicians, it's essential, because if we're talking about raising the demand to repeal the draconian Halliburton's Act, we've got to work at a legislative level to do that. So there are sample letters in these packets that we have put together that include press releases, texts of testimonials made during various council hearings, expanded options on how to work with broader groups like trade unions, ecumenical bodies, educational institutions, and groups with progressive market-driven interests, all of which have in some form or the other, they do publicly make demands to end the blockade. And the other thing, that some of the information that you'll find in the packets, it can be used and tailored to specific locales depending on the focus of your legislative action campaign. And they can also serve as a template on a local level. For example, how do we write a resolution? Or what should go into a 2-minute testimonial if you got an opportunity to testify before a city council? What are the specifics that should go into a testimonial before a legislative body? So what are some of the creative graphics that you can use on petitions that will appeal to different audiences? For example, in New York, in our campaign to the New York City Council, we actually made three petitions. One petition had a picture of the Pope with Fidel. Another one had a photograph of Beyonce with the children in Cuba when she went there to visit. And another one was Fidel and Nelson Mandela. And when we sat out in the streets, when we went out into the streets, we sat in blocks, in little spaces, in little parks. You know, people resonated to go to the petition that they could mostly identify with. So that was kind of like a creative way. And so it's important, and our important observation also from this legislative work, and our experience has been that it is important, it's so important to have personal relationships that we can develop with these legislative aides, because it's the legislative aides who are going to really be at the forefront of pushing the petitions, of pushing the ideas for any of the creative resolutions that we want to try to get. So, you know, you have to be able to successfully maneuver in this work. And you have to be prepared even sometimes to initially draft the resolution yourself and to even write your own press release for the council person's chief of staff or the media persons that are requesting you to do that. And if you're in a position to write your own press release, we have control on what we want to say in those press releases that go out. And there are some samples of press releases that we actually wrote in the packets in the toolkit that I'm talking about. And finally, we have to seize the moments. We've mentioned this throughout our discussion. Yesterday, Sister Joan Gibbs and I here in New York, we seized this moment to follow up with the New York City Council Speaker and the Majority Leader regarding the urgency to raise Resolution 1092. Our resolution has not been passed yet, but our letter informed the City Council persons of Cuba's joint venture with China, specifically in the production of the interferon alpha 2B, and that the protocol is now successfully being utilized in China and Cuba and other places to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. So as a result of the US blockade, we emphasize that the protocol is evidently, it's unavailable in the United States, as so are so many other different medicines and what have you, which Cuba has produced. So we pointed out in our letter that during this unfortunate pandemic, several members of Congress, as well as other state and local elected officials, are infected, suspected of, or quarantined with the virus. And unfortunately, this includes 2 of our local elected officials here in New York City in our city council, and that includes City Councilwoman Inez Barron, who tested positive for the coronavirus. And Councilwoman Barron was the sponsor of our Resolution 1092. So we ended by telling the council leaders that it's appropriate, it's totally appropriate, and even more so at this moment to raise the issue of respecting Cuba's sovereignty and reverse the draconian anti-humanitarian policies of the Trump administration. Thus, to this end, we urge that they support and present to the full City Council for a vote on the New York City Council Resolution 1092, calling upon the president to lift the blockade and end the travel ban. So we want to thank you and for your participation today, and knowing that this treasure trove of information is available. And I want to end on by saying thank you to our friends in Cuba and around the globe. Siempre con Cuba.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rosemary. As always, a lot of really good information. I just wanted to say that I know that there had been a response via email from Cindy Domingo from Seattle, talking about some of the work that she's been doing. She and her comrades there had been doing around the Seattle City Council legislation and trying to get them to be more actively engaged in, the issue of interferon. And so just wanted to lift up that there's work happening already in various cities. And as she rightfully said, all cities should be pushing to have resolutions and pressing their elected officials about this drug. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that during the Q&A session, which leads me to introducing John Waller, who many of you know wears many different hats, including working with IFCO Pastors for Peace, including being the coordinator of the Cuba Caravans and working as a leader in the Seattle area with the Seattle Friendshipment Committee. So John is going to take it from here. He's going to be helping to get us straightened out with our questions that he's been receiving. Before I send it over to John, I was remiss in suggesting that if people did want to email questions, we've got a lot already in the queue, so I'm not sure how many we'll be able to get to, but John will do the best he can to help navigate that. If you do want to still email a question, you can send it to johnwaller46@gmail.com. That's John Waller, WALLER 46@gmail.com. And the last thing I will ask is that panelists, as you're answering questions, recognize that we've got about a half hour or so to answer questions, and that we'll try to ask you to be as brief as possible, informative but brief, so that we can get as many questions in as possible. Sending it over to you, John.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
And I guess
So,
all the panelists can come back now, right?
so inevitably, most of the questions are actually to Ana Silvia. So I'm going to try and deal with those first and then end with things that more relate to solidarity work in the US. So Ana Silvia, there's a number of questions that relate to collaboration between the US and Cuba. That we all remember Cuba's amazing offer at the time of Hurricane Katrina to send doctors. So people are wondering whether there's been any offer coming from Cuba, as you're sending doctors around the world. Has there been any offer from Cuba to send doctors to the US? Has there been any offer for any other kind of collaboration? For instance, the use of the Cuban drug interferon AB in the US. So that's about the US government. But we also note that there has been collaboration between Cuba and the Roswell Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York, regarding the cancer vaccine. And Governor Cuomo has been involved in that, and New York is the state probably hit hardest by the COVID-19. So has there been any discussion about collaboration directly with New York State?
You hear me? No, yes, now.
Now we do.
Well, there is no any request from the U.S. government to Cuba to any sort of support medical team or provide this drug. But as you mentioned, as during Katrina hurricane, I am convinced that we are going to act in the same way. Regarding the cooperation between Roswell para-Cuban institutions, medical institutions regarding this interferon, I don't have any information on this issue, so I cannot say yes or no because I don't have information if they are having talking on this issue.
Okay, so a follow-up then about interferon. People are wondering how it's being used in Cuba with the cases of coronavirus that you have, but also, do you have any information about its effectiveness when it's been used in China?
Well, let me explain. The interferon alpha 2B is a retroviral that was developed in Cuba in 1986 by the Center of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology. We have been using this interferon for over 30 years, and it has been used to fight diseases as hepatitis B and C, dengue, shingles, and HIV with a very good results, And as well, you can read in the press, the Chinese health authority decided to have this drug in the protocol for treatment of the patients with the COVID-19. I am not a doctor, but what I read about the use of this drug is that it's very effective with those critical patients. Patients maybe are not so not effective. We cannot use it in the young people that maybe they are not going to develop complications during the disease. But those who have complication is the results of the use of the interferon is very good. So this, I don't have statistics, but the information got it is that the Chinese authorities are considering, the health authorities, that the interferon alpha 2B they have positive results with the use of these drugs in critical patients.
Okay, 2 or 3 more quick questions. One is, has May Day in Cuba, the public events, have they been cancelled? Are other events being cancelled?
Well, we have been canceled some events, but as the information that we have, May Day is not canceled yet. I think that we have to see how the situation is evolved in the country, and we are going to inform later on this issue. But as far as the information that was presented to the Cuban public, even is in the news in Cuba, there is no decision yet to cancel May 1st, but it depends on the epidemiological evolution in the country.
Okay. Now, a question. There are, I think, a couple of hundred people, Cubans and foreign visitors, who've been quarantined in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Are these facilities dispersed around the island? What are the conditions like there?
Yes, we have all over the island facility. We have in Cuba more than 150 hospitals, and we are accommodate this hospital to isolate people, not only for Cuban, but also foreign. And they have all the conditions for isolation, and that the patient receive the care that they need.
Okay, and my final question to you, Ana Silvia, it's a general one. Given the US blockade and the importance of tourism to Cuba, how is Cuba going to handle the sudden loss of hard currency from visitors from around the world?
Well, I think this pandemic is going to have a negative effect for all the countries, rich and poor country, developing country and developed countries. And it's going to have, of course, an impact in our development in the economy of Cuba, because tourism is an important source of income of Cuba, but it's not the only one. It's not the only one. So we are working in order to minimize the impact that all these measures that we are taking in order to prevent the spread of this COVID in Cuba are going to have in the economy. One of the issues also that make this situation harder for us, what you mentioned, is the blockade to Cuba, that in the last year has been strengthened, and it has been more aggressive to Cuba and in a larger scale to Cuba. So this situation is going to put a burden in the economy of Cuba. But as I told you, tourism is not the only source of income of Cuba. We are a resilient people, so we are going to find ways recognizing that it's going to have an impact, because it's going to have an impact in all the countries. In all the countries, this situation is going to be in the economy of the country. But we have to working to find ways in order to pass this situation and to try to maintain our social system and to provide to our population all what they need, and to maintain the social advantage of our revolution.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. I may come back to you towards the end, but I want to now move on to some questions to other participants. So I have a question that is for Rosemary Mealy. So,
okay.
Rosemary?
Yes, I'm here.
A number of people have said they were very impressed by your presentation and want more information about how they can access the toolkit.
Okay, we have a screenshot, split screen information piece there, but if we can't get it up, I can give it to you now. I don't have it here. I didn't prepare it. It came up a few moments ago. It's not a long tag. So give me a second and I can tell you. All right, there it is. Thank you. So that's how you can get it by going to the website that you see at the top, the July26.org. Okay, go into that website and you'll see the New York Campaign Toolkit, and then there's another shot that has other information. There's another shot. I don't think that one came up. However, it's very simple. You'd go to July26.org, July26.org/ .org/local-resolutions/. Okay, there it is. Okay, thank you. Does that satisfy the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
John, this is Gail. Can I just say that let's add that to the documents that we will be sharing, that along with the other things that I mentioned. So I'm keeping a running list here.
Yeah, good point. This is a question for Andres. You spoke, Andres, about the voting behavior of Cuban Americans in Miami. Do you know anything about their voting behavior elsewhere in the US, especially in New Jersey?
Well, we don't have specific information about Cubans in New Jersey engaged publicly in the efforts to support the Cuban people. But there are organizations in New York City that for years, La Casa de las Americas, for example, have been active in that pursuit. So people can approach the Casa de las Americas and other organizations in the Cuban Solidarity Movement to participate in the activities and programs in support of the Cuban people.
Okay, thank you, Andres.
Hello,
a question.
John.
Yeah.
Can I say something real quick? This is Ike.
Yeah.
I just wanted to also plug the website of the International Cuba Conference. That's still up, and it's also updated with, which will have all of these documents that we need that have come up, and we'll also have the recording of this that will also hopefully be on YouTube, and that's www.us-cubanormalization.org. So that's one word, us-cubanormalization.org. That will be continually updated and people can reference it.
John, I'd like to also say that in New Jersey, our friends over there, they have a real challenge because one of the most vehement anti-Cuban persons on a national level is Congressman Melendez, who's Cuban, by the way. And it would be really important at this time that if they're not already doing so, that the friends in New Jersey who are just becoming involved in the Solidarity movement to confront him using this particular, some of the discussions that we've had here today and that you'll find in the toolkit. We'll be also putting up a sample letter that we're sending to the Congressional Black Caucus, basically laying out the same types of information that we sent to the council people in New York City. And that letter can also be used as a template to direct our concerns to the folk in New Jersey, to their congressional representatives in New Jersey. So I think on all fronts, we need to try to crack this thing with some of the folk who are leading, say that they're leading the people in those states. So that would be another suggestion that I would make. And that toolkit will have, or does have, some templates that could be very useful in addressing those who are sitting on, those representatives who are sitting on the fence or who maybe do not even know, and using this moment to educate them.
Thank you, Rosemary. I just want to point out that Senator Menendez was actually born in the United States of Cuban parents who fled Batista. I believe he's never set foot in Cuba, but he claims to represent the Cuban American community. Okay, I now want to shift the discussion towards solidarity in the US. So questions really about how do we most effectively work in the current situation to build solidarity with Cuba? How do we push forward the campaign against the blockade? And also a request, which perhaps you will, I think any of the panelists could come in on this, but at some point, Gail, there's a request that you talk about some of the things that are in the action program that was being proposed for the now postponed conference.
I'm sorry, John, who was that directed to?
Well, the request about the action program is directed to you, but this is really an invite to any of the panelists who want to come in on how do we effectively push forward the campaign against the blockade in the current situation.
Well, I'll just quickly say about the action plan. I think that that will be something that, you know, would be among the documents that we would want to share. I think that the situation in Cuba is, as it is everywhere, particularly as it relates to this virus, is changing daily. I mean, almost hourly. You know, there's a lot of ups and downs, and I think that there are some aspects of the action plan that ought to encompass a response or at least, you know, a connection to the Cuba's approach to dealing with this virus as another, you know, concrete way in which we can not only lift up what the Cuban example, but lift up ways that Cuba is being, you know, playing such a critical role internationally. So it's kind of, you know, I wouldn't want to, as we mentioned, as we were planning for this, read this list of the action plan. I mean, it obviously incorporates some of the stuff that people would assume would have, you know, ending the all U.S. economic, commercial, and financial sanctions against Cuba. And by the way, sanctions, period, but, you know, that's a whole, almost a whole nother webinar, but it's very related. The whole idea of sanctions and Cuba being at the top of that list is something I think we all need to be concerned about. But there are a variety of different demands and then actions in terms of, you know, actions that we might take on local, national level, local level. Some things are more pertinent for certain communities than they are for others. So rather than maybe read through this whole list, I think that this is something that would be appropriate to share with the participants of this webinar, and to encourage this to be an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing conversation about how it is that we as a community of people who are opposed to this blockade policy, how is it that we can make the best use of our energy and efforts to be supportive of our Cuban family. So I guess I would leave it there for now, that it's something I think that we can share. And if there's anything, obviously, that any panelists want to say specifically, that's we're open to that. But that at least we would be sharing this draft proposed action plan with the participants of today's webinar.
This is yep, if I may say something. Hello?
Well, Rosemary, but go ahead. Go ahead. I'll wait. Okay. I'll wait for you.
As somebody from Canada, and often where, you know, Canada perhaps sometimes gets forgotten about, I think it's important to understand that that Canada has, in a sense, been strategically targeted by Washington. The strategic nature of Canada-Cuba relations perhaps was symbolized or recognized by the Cubans, or symbolically by the fact that Josefina Vidal, who led the negotiations that led to the rapprochement, was appointed ambassador of Cuba to Canada. She's a leading Cuban diplomat. And, you know, as I said before, you know, Canada represents the single largest source of tourists to Cuba. Over 1 million Canadians visit a year. Canada is the largest single investor in Cuba, coming from Canadian companies. And so what's happened here is that we've seen an erosion of this relationship between Canada and Cuba. We've seen, as I said before, this attempt to sort of mirror U.S. economic, U.S. policy towards Cuba diplomatically, and perhaps this might be reflected, even though it would be very difficult, but it might be reflected in Canada perhaps shifting its economic relations with Cuba. Our current Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, has particularly made it very target of, a goal of her tenure as the foreign minister, specifically to target Venezuela, and has seen Cuba as a particular problem in dealing with Venezuela. It's not by chance that Chrystia Freeland and the Canadian government played a leading role in leading and creating this obscene entity called the Lima Group, which has played such an odious role in attempting to roll back all whatever limited progressive gains have been made by the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. So I think one of the important things here is in terms of the kind of Cuba Solidarity Movement is working with, we've worked with a lot of MPs. We've sent letters that are all on the Canadian Network on Cuba's website. We've organized a symposium. I think it needs to be focused on by everybody in the Solidarity Movement that this strategic relationship between Canada and Cuba is increasingly under pressure. And the Trudeau government, the Trudeau regime, if I may use that term, is increasingly playing a very benign, if not malign role, I would say, in attempting to shift this very strategic relationship onto a basis that might be very confrontational. And so these are things that we're very concerned about in Canada, and that we're working both not only with MPs, but we also have a number of things taking place in the streets, taking place among what we consider ordinary folks in society, to outside of the parliament, to try and create sort of this groundswell of public opinion in terms of ensuring to defend Canada-Cuba relations, at least as they exist, and perhaps to put them on a better footing.
I'd like
Can I
to
say something, John?
Yeah, okay. Go, Ike, then Martin, you go first, then Ike.
Okay, yes, I wanted to say something about what we can do today, especially in response to what's happening in the world and what makes Cuba different in response to this worldwide health crisis. And that is, above all, the human beings that have been transformed by the Cuban Revolution, and the contrast with a country like here, where working people are treated like objects of brutal government decrees, where they're trying to isolate us and atomize working people and instill fear and passivity. In Cuba, it's working people that are the key, that are subjects, not objects. And that's what we need here we need solidarity and organization of working people to protect lives and livelihoods. In Cuba, Ana Silvia was mentioning a little bit of that, but there's a lot to be said. Working people are organizing in every neighborhood and workplace, health seminars, family doctor visits, people going door to door to make sure that looking after the most vulnerable in society. And of course, the international solidarity that Cuba is offering, not competition and profiteering, but real solidarity. And so that's why, and so we should demand, one of the main things in telling the truth about the Cuban Revolution is to demand that Washington stop disrupting Cuba's medical cooperation abroad. And of course, to demand the lifting of the economic sanctions against Cuba and Venezuela that have a real impact on the health system. And that the US government offer real economic aid to the third world, beginning with canceling Puerto Rico's debt, but to make available medical doctors and supplies everywhere in the world.
Yeah, quickly, just concretely, we have to understand, and we understood when we rescheduled the conference, hopefully to have it on November 15th and 16th weekend, but we are all dependent on what the objective reality is with this medical catastrophe and how that will unfold, which we're all monitoring and we're looking, as we've been discussing today. This is the context. Now, if it's possible, one concrete thing that we have talked about before this thing unfolded and accelerated was the vote every year in the United Nations is scheduled to be October 26th and 27th. This is a vote where the world near unanimously condemns the blockade, and which is a very important thing for Cuba. And this year we were trying and hoping that coming out of the international conference would be a organizing internationally coordinated protests in the streets that day in solidarity with this world vote condemning the blockade. If that is objectively possible, that is one concrete thing we want to do. The other activities, especially the legislative things, that if we can do that virtual or online, whatever ways that we can do that, and as soon as we can do it face to face, the suggestions around that are very important, and we have the information on that. But we should all be looking to the UN vote, and that will be followed if you know, if all is possible, if whatever's possible with the rescheduled international conference November 15th, 16th weekend.
Rosemary, did you still want to speak on this?
Yes, I raised my hand. I raised my hand, yes. Okay, I want to speak to this. We have 228 people who are on this webinar. I was thinking, and I think like we can duplicate these exact same things that we're doing right now in clusters of 10, 20 people. We need to expand our movement. And I'm sure out of the 228 participants on here that we have a lot of new people. The point is, it's really about people in this country not knowing a lot. You know, they don't know, just like someone said earlier from Canada, that people thought that after Obama, there was no more blockade. I meet people, I have students who knew that. So, you know, education becomes critical. And I think that since some of us throughout the country, we're sheltering in place, this is a great opportunity to use the technology to duplicate 1, 2, 3 webinars that bring the same type of information that we're doing here today. And that would be one of my suggestions.
Okay, I want to say one or two things that at the moment we can't travel to Cuba, except unless you're a Cuban national or a resident of Cuba. That will last for the next month. But once the situation changes and we are able to travel to Cuba again, that's one of the most important things we can do in solidarity with Cuba. The brigade that was going to go at May Day has been postponed. It will now be going at the end of November. But we all need to be thinking about in the future, how can we maximize travel to Cuba, both for its solidarity purposes and for its very direct economic benefits for the Cuban population. I have one more quick question to Ana Silvia, if you're there. When we are able to travel to Cuba again, and people can bring things with them in their bags, is there any particular supplies that are of most crucial importance right now for Cuba?
You're muted still, Ambassador. There you go.
Yeah, we are receiving donations. Just right now, we are receiving donation from China. For those who want to send money to Cuba, also we are going to open an account. I don't have yet maybe the list of the most needed maybe materials, but I think that maybe all those who are using for the safety of the person and maybe the mask, although we are fabricating a lot of face masks in Cuba, maybe those material to cleaning is going to be useful in Cuba. But later on, we can, through Gail, through Ike, through Martin, we can inform you what are the most needed materials in Cuba in order that those of you that want to make donations could do it, and also the way to do it.
Okay, question now for Jocelyn Velasquez. Can you talk about the number of coronavirus cases in Puerto Rico? Is it growing? Are activists trying to organize in spite of the martial law? And if so, how is that going? What are the repercussions?
Sí, el número de personas contagiadas que el gobierno alega son 21 personas, pero como expliqué antes, no tenemos confianza en lo que el gobierno dice, porque no es la primera vez que ellos dan una cifra. Eso fue lo que ocurrió en el huracán María, donde ellos dijeron que habían muerto 60 personas y después resultó que fueron 4,000.
The numbers that the government has given to us are 21. When I talk later, when Hurricane Maria, the government says that the people who died were 64. When we realized that the number of deaths were more than 4,000. So we don't believe that the the number of the government.
Eso se complica porque el gobierno se está negando a hacer las pruebas a la ciudadanía, con la excusa de que solamente se le van a hacer pruebas a personas que hayan viajado fuera de Puerto Rico, cuando ya hay casos de personas que no han estado fuera de la isla ni en contacto con nadie que haya estado y presentan síntomas, pero aún así los envían a su casa y no les dan el tratamiento necesario.
The government has not making the tests, and when the people, only when they make the test are the people that present a very sickness, and that's a problem because the spread of the sickness is uncertain.
Al presente solamente ellos alegan que han realizado 52 pruebas, por eso es que insistimos en que los números del gobierno no son confiables. Con relación al tema de la ley marcial, el problema radica en que necesitan la aprobación de la Cámara y del Senado para poder implementarla. Ellos actualmente están sesionando y han estado aprobando algunas medidas, pero tendrían ellos que aprobar la ley marcial para que entonces pudiera haber algún tipo de recurso legal. Y los tribunales están cerrados, así que es bien dificultoso poder presentar algún tipo de alegato ante la Corte, porque los tribunales no están funcionando. Sobre el tema de los grupos políticos, por ejemplo, en el caso de nosotros lo más que hemos podido hacer es que estamos convocando a un cacerolazo este próximo martes 24 de marzo a las 9 de la noche, que es la hora que empieza el toque de queda, para reclamar por la salud, reclamar que se hagan más pruebas a las personas, que hayan mejores servicios de salud y que se le garantice a los trabajadores que no están de manera regular trabajando, que se le dé algún tipo de ayuda económica para que puedan sobrevivir, porque el gobierno alegó que iban a ser 15 días, pero ya están diciendo que van a extender esto por 45.
Was it Rogelio?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
About the martial law, the activists we are organizing we are calling to a protest, virtual protest, and a cacerolazo, demanding better health care and, for example, the close of the airports, etc.
Básicamente, gracias.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I think we are now just beyond 4, so we're we've kind of come to the end of our time. Again, I just want to extend gratitude on behalf of all of us who've been involved in organizing, to extend our gratitude for everybody joining the call. I think at the height, the number I saw was 257, which is incredible. We will be sending out more information. I want to thank all of the panelists. I want to thank our dear Ambassador Ana Silvia for staying with us throughout this whole call and being able to not only field questions, but I hope get a sense of the incredible amount of solidarity that exists for Cuba, and that we, I know I speak for everyone when I say that, we're here, we're thinking of our Cuban friends and family, and are grateful for the example that Cuba continues to represent. All of the comments have been really important. Isaac and Rosemary and many others talking about the interferon and all of the different ways that Cuba is stepping up, and we're grateful. We're very, very grateful. And we'll continue to do this. I want to remind people, please, tomorrow afternoon at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, we will be having the panel on the impact of the blockade, not only in the U.S., but around, not only in Cuba, rather, but around the world. And to find out more about that, to make sure that you register, go to the website, Ike, what is it, U.S. Cuba, say it again for us, Ike? US.
www.us-cubanormalization.org.
Like a true New Yorker, www. Sounds so New Yorkish. But anyway, please click on the website and you can register there. But make sure that's going to be a really informative panel. So we hope that that you all will return tomorrow. And thank you everybody for participating. I think that this was a tremendous success. We're not going to let this coronavirus get us down. We're going to continue to be in communication with one another, share information, and continue to express our solidarity with Cuba. So thank you all, and Viva Cuba.
Viva.
Viva Cuba.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, everybody.
Viva la Revolución Cubana.
See.